Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today, I'm going to be covering this book, A Lady's Life in the Rocky Mountains. I bought this book used in Arizona. I don't know how much. There's not a marking in the top right corner of a page. I bought it at the book stop in Tucson, Arizona, located at 214 North 4th Avenue. I bought this back in December of 2021. This book was written by an Isabella L. Bird, who was an English woman with a fair bit of wealth, and she spent her wealth traveling across the world. This copy, this Dover edition, first published in 2003, is an unabridged republication of the 7th edition of the work, originally published in 1882 by G.P. Putnam's Sons, New York. It retains the style and usage inconsistencies of the source. In the first few pages, there's a note to the second edition that says, "For the benefit of other lady travelers, I wish to explain that my Hawaiian riding dress is the American lady's mountain dress, a half-fitting jacket, a skirt reaching to the ankles, and full Turkish trousers gathered into frills falling over the boots, a thoroughly serviceable and feminine costume for mountaineering and other rough traveling, as in the Alps or any other part of the world." That was from November 27th, 1879. The note to the third edition states, "In consequence of the unobserved omission of a date to my letters having been pointed out to me, I take this opportunity of stating that I traveled in Colorado in the autumn and early winter of 1873, on my way to England from the Sandwich Islands. The letters are a faithful picture of the country and state of society as it then was, but friends who have returned from the West within the last 6 months tell me that things are rapidly changing, that the frame house is replacing the log cabin, and that the footprints of elk and bighorn may be sought for in vain on the dewy slopes of Estes Park." January 16th, 1880. There are 27 letters she sends to her sister. This is the story of Isabella Bird's travels through Colorado, and she wanted to see the majesty of the Rocky Mountains, but she wanted to travel alone. She knows how to ride a horse. She knows how to take care of a horse. She's very, in a way, tomboyish, but is still very distinctly feminine. She's an all-around woman, so to speak. And all these different skills, all these different traits help her in her travels. So she complains first and foremost about the train travel that it takes to get there, how so many gnats there are as it passes through Utah and western Colorado into Fort Collins area. Then from Fort Collins, she rides south to the Denver area. From the Denver area, she looks for people that can help her get to Estes Park. So for a while, she stays with a Mr. and Mrs. Chalmers. She spends at least 5 days there, no nearer Estes Park than the day before. She quotes, "This is a life in which nothing happens. I got down and found a single room of the rudest kind, with the wall at one end partially broken down, holes in the roof, holes for windows, and no furniture but 2 chairs and 2 unplaned wooden shelves, with some sacks of straw upon them for beds. There was an adjacent cabin room, with a stove, benches, and table where they cooked and ate, but this was all. A hard, sad-looking woman looked at me measuringly. She said that they sold milk and butter to parties who camped in the canyon, that they never had any boarders but 2 asthmatic old ladies, but they would take me for $5 per week if I could make myself agreeable. If I went back to Fort Collins, I thought I was farther from a mountain life, but had no choice but Denver, a place from which I shrank, or to take the cars for New York. Here the life was rougher than any I had ever seen, and the people repelled me by their faces and manners. But if I could rough it for a few days, I might, I thought, get over canyons and all other difficulties into Estes Park, which has become the goal of my journey and hopes. So I decided to remain." She ends up at a household simply titled Dr. and Mrs. H. The story of my host is a story of misfortune. It indicates who should not come to Colorado. He and his wife are under 35, the son of a London physician in large practice with a liberal education in the largest sense of the word, unusual culture and accomplishments, and the partner of a physician in good practice in the second city in England. He showed symptoms which threatened pulmonary disease. In an evil hour, he heard of Colorado with its unrivaled climate, boundless resources, and fascinated not only by these material advantages, but by the notion of being able to found or reform society on advanced social theories of his own, he became an emigrant. Mrs. Hughes is one of the most charming, cultured, and lovable women I have ever seen, and their marriage is an ideal one. Both are fitted to shine in any society, but neither had the slightest knowledge of domestic and farming details. Dr. H did not know how to saddle or harness a horse. Mrs. H did not know whether you should put an egg into cold or hot water when you meant to boil it. That family, as she says, is the kind of family that should not move to Colorado, or at least not move to the wild parts of Colorado. They might be a better fit in Denver or Colorado Springs than in the mountains west of Denver. A young Swiss girl, devoted to them both, works as hard as they do. They have one horse, no wagon, some poultry, a few cows, but no hired man. It is the hardest and least ideal struggle that I have ever seen made by educated people. And this family she stays with leads me into the footnotes. On the line it indicates who should not come to Colorado, there is a footnote that says, "The story is ended now. A few months after my visit, Mrs. H died a few days after her confinement, and was buried on the bleak hillside, leaving her husband with 5 children under 6 years old. And Dr. H is a prosperous man on one of the sunniest islands of the Pacific, with the devoted Swiss friend as his second wife." And that honestly sounds kind of like a drama in a way. The first wife dies, and the second wife, the housekeeper, ends up moving with him to take care of those kids and becomes his second wife, and with the prosperity implied, probably mother to some more children. So she stays with the Hughes for a while and then eventually ends up in Estes Park and is welcomed by Jim Nugent. Jim Nugent is a mountain man that, according to this book, was a founding figure in the history of Estes Park, but which isn't really mentioned in any other source as far as I'm aware. Jim Nugent is a rough mountain man, an alcoholic. He has many vices, and he lives by himself in a cabin in the mountains. He's a man who received a good education. He knows how to be cultured, but he's very terrible at living in a more cultured society. Isabella Bird spends days riding with him and talking, and around her, he is an agreeable man. Around no one else is he agreeable. In fact, everyone else in Estes Park that she talks to advises her to stay away from him because he is a violent person to them. And a single lady like her might get hurt by Jim Nugent. As she describes Estes Park in letter 8, "How time has slipped by, I do not know. This is a glorious region, and the air and life are intoxicating. I live mainly out of doors and on horseback, wear my half-threadbare Hawaiian dress, sleep sometimes under the stars on a bed of pine boughs, ride on a Mexican saddle, and hear once more of the low music of my Mexican spurs. There is a stranger. Heave arfa brick at him," is said by many travelers to express the feeling of the new settlers in these territories. But still, I have not answered the natural question. What is Estes Park? Among the striking peculiarities of these mountains are hundreds of high-lying valleys, large and small, at heights varying from 6,000 to 11,000 feet. The most important are North Park, held by hostile Indians; Middle Park, famous for hot springs and trout; South Park, rich in minerals; and San Luis Park. South Park is 10,000 feet high, a great rolling prairie 70 miles long, well grassed and watered, but nearly closed by snow in winter. So she stays with a Sam Edwards, who is one of two Welshmen that live in Estes Park, or at least in that portion of Estes Park. They are ranchers that co-own a large ranch, many, many heads of cattle. They have a prosperous home, several hired helpers, and several cabins for which guests can stay in, Isabella Bird among them. These families are welcoming. The two Welshmen are somewhat educated and provide good conversation for Isabella Bird. She stays with them and eventually leaves after a couple months to explore the rest of the state, but she returns to look for them. At this point, the two ranchers' families have retired to Denver for the winter, but she is snowed in and so is waiting for a chance to get out of the snow and back to the lower elevations. Eventually she does, and she leaves Denver, Estes Park, Longmount, Fort Collins, and Colorado behind. She is a figure that is talked about in the newspapers the entire time she is there. A woman traveling alone, an English woman with money who is trying to see the West as it has been described to her and as she sees it. And in these letters to her sister, she describes a beautiful region. I'm opening Women's History Month with this because it is both history, it is autobiographical, it is a strong and independent woman traveling across the world and making her own life in this way. It is the kind of woman that gets referenced by so many other authors. I know in one of the books I recently read about a young woman in Yosemite, the introduction is written by a person that references Isabella Bird. And so many other authors reference her because she is a pivotal author in Colorado history. Not necessarily the most important one, but an important one in the history of Colorado. So that's where I leave you with this book. If you think any of this intrigues you, I would recommend checking it out, though she does use the word rarefied far too many times for my interest. I've only ever heard the word rarefied in reference to high altitudes by other English writers, including the writer of The Ascent of Rum Doodle. And those two British authors use it a lot. So just be prepared for that word to show up far more times than you've ever seen it anywhere else combined. But yeah, I liked this book. It is very interesting. It is basically just a travel diary, but in a very good way. My name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.